Question number 25. What can a trigger do but a process builder cannot? Triggers are the last resort when it drills down to automating or performing some background tasks. We use workflows and process builders to automate as much as we can. But there are certain limitations which can only be fulfilled if we use triggers. The key limitations of process builders would be we cannot update unrelated records, we cannot delete via standard process builder, we cannot clone records, and we cannot fire outbound messages just by using the standard process builder. Question number 26. How do you retrieve or fetch all test classes in an org? So to fetch all test classes in an org, we can simply write a SOQL query. Now, the assumption here is that all our test classes, the names of the test classes or the Apex classes would end with the keyword test. If that's the case, we can write a simple SOQL and say select id comma name from Apex class. This is the object name where name, like, since the class name ends with test, this is something that we can put in the keyword filter for name. Let's try to execute this and see what is written. So currently we just have one test class, which is the test class checker test. Let me just open this. Right, so this is my test class, right? So this is opening up the test classes. But what if this is not true? What if my test classes do not end with the keyword test, right? That could be a scenario. So in that case, let's go to anonymous window and let's just remove all of this and let's write a SOSL, which is a search query, right? We all know that @istest annotation is something that will be present in all test classes, right? So we can leverage this particular keyword and do a SOSL. So what would I write? I would write a SOSL saying find @istest in all fields. This is the syntax for SOSL. Returning, I want to return the object, right? So my object is Apex class, and what fields do I want to return? I just want to return the id comma name, and this query will return a list of s objects. So instead of a list nested inside a list, I just want to return my Apex class information. So I just want the first record that is returned from this SOSL, which would be an Apex class array, right? So this will return me a array of Apex class records, right? So let me name it test classes and let's try to debug this. All right, let's try to debug this and see what is received. So the query ran successfully, and let's click on the debug, and you see the Apex test classes are Apex class with id comma name, which means there's just one class which has the test keyword on it and has the @istest annotation, which denotes that it is a test class, right? So there are two methods. Either you can use a simple SOQL provided all your test classes end with the keyword test, or else you can use a SOSL. The second approach would be a better one. Question number 27. How does access work if the Apex class is without sharing? So if without sharing is explicitly mentioned on the Apex class, the Apex class won't enforce sharing rules for the current user, which means sharing rules won't be implied. So if a class is not declared as with or without sharing, the current sharing rules remain in effect. This means that the class does not enforce sharing rules except if it acquires sharing rules from another class. Now, for example, if the class is called by another class that has sharing enforced, then sharing is enforced for the called class as well. Question number 28. If Lightning Data Service is showing a field and the logged in user does not have the read permissions to the field, is the field shown to the user or how is it? So this question asks whether Lightning Data Service components like record edit form, record view form would have access to a field if the field level security is not present for a particular field, right? So for example, the other phone field on the contact, right? The one that we used earlier for the sharing context, we'll be using the same field and we'll be looking at if we try to access that field on a Lightning Data Service component, is that accessible or not? All right. So let's first of all create a new Lightning component and I'll name it LDS sharing component. All right, and let's click on submit. So this will create my Aura bundle, and let's simply embed a Lightning record edit form. This should have a record ID parameter and the object API name, right? So our object API name is contact, and let's fetch a record ID for this particular record edit form. So I'll go to Salesforce, I'll go to contacts, and let's take the record ID from the URL. Alright, let me click on save. So my edit form is saved. Now if I want to explicitly show some particular fields to be available to edit, I can use the lightning input field tag. So these are the two fields that I'm wanting to edit whenever I open this component and check the record edit form. So our component is ready. Now let's do something. Let's embed this into a lightning app. I think we already created an app. Let me just quickly check it. Yeah, we can use the navigate to URL application, and I'll just comment this out. And let's embed our new component, which is LDS sharing comp. Let's save this. So our application is saved and our component is also saved. Now let's click on the preview button and let's see what happens by default. Alright, so I'm able to see the last name here. On the component level, I'm just able to see the last name, and I'm able to modify it, right? Let's go to the contact record and let's go to the detail section and check whether we are able to see the other phone as well. We are not able to see it, right? So let's go do something. Let's go to setup, or let's directly click on edit object, and let's provide the field level security for system administrator. So for a previous question, remember we removed the accessibility for other phone. Let's just give that access back to this field. So if I click on set field level security, and here let's provide the accessibility for system admin and click on save. So now that we save the field level security and refresh the same component, we are able to see both last name and other phone, which means Lightning Data Service automatically takes into consideration the field level security. So if you do not have access to a particular field and you are referencing that, the logged in users field level security will be taken into concern, and accordingly the fields will be shown. All right, let's look at the next question. Question number 29. Can you give some good examples of using the schema class in Apex? Talks about how can we use schema class in Apex and some different or good use cases of using schema. So here I am at the Apex reference guide, and I've opened the schema class description, which says it contains methods for obtaining any kind of schema related information. So there are a good chunk of methods available here that help retrieve metadata information. Now let's look at some of them and try to figure out what are they used for. So I'll just simply create one more Apex class, and I'll call it schema class descriptor. Alright, now let's create some static void methods. So I've created three methods. In the first method, we'll be trying to identify key prefixes, which means for any object, the record ID has a 15 or an 18 digit length, right? The first three characters of that record ID identify which object does it specify to. So we'll try to figure out the key prefix for an object, all right? The second method will be trying to identify record types for an object. And the third method will be trying to identify pick list values for a given field. All right, so let's start with the first method. Let's take in account as an object. Okay, so I'll use object name as account, and now I can simply use the schema class and say schema dot see. So you see options coming up, so we'll use the get global describe option. All right, and we'll say get, and here we need to mention the object name. In our case, it's account. All right, now once we have schema.get global describe.get object name, we'll use the get describe method. This will describe our object, and then we'll use the get key prefix. So this code snippet will get you the key prefix of any object. You just have to specify the object name. All right, so let's look into this first. Let's click on save. And let's execute this from the anonymous Apex window. So I'll just say schema class.descriptor.schema use case to identify key prefixes. Let's see what does this return. Execute. So if I go to the debug only, so it's saying key prefix for account is 001. So if we quickly have to double check, if I go to any account record here, and let's say if I just open SF training, you'll see that all the records that are for account start with the keyword 001. All right, so this was the first use case which comes in handy, and we can use schema class for the same. Let's look at the second use case, which is about identifying record types. So I'll use schema dot s object type. So you see developer console is automatically filling up information for you, and here we can say the object name. Now what is the object name here? Let's look at contact record types, and once I select the object name, I get an option or a method which says get record type infos by name. All right, let's try to debug this. Let's try to save this first. So this saves up fine. Let's click on execute anonymous, and this time use the second method. Execute. Debug only. So you see we are getting a list of all the record types, wherein the first record type is master, right? And I think this is the only record type, and master record type has all the other information. The developer name is master, the get name function will give you master. There's a record type ID, whether it is active or not, it is available or not, and if it is a default record type mapping or not, and all of it. All right, now that this is how you can probably fetch record type names. But what if you want to fetch the record type ID, right? In that case you'll need the name of the record type. So an extension to the same method we can also use, saying get record type infos by name dot get which record type do we want to look into. We want to look into the master record type and get the record type ID. So we can say get record type ID and click on save. All right, I'll just change the debug log here. I'll say record type ID for master is, and let's save this now and execute it. I'll execute the same debug log, and let's look at the debug log and click on debug only. And now the first query is the first code snippet is returning me the same result, but the second one is returning the record type ID of the master record type. All right, so this is how you can fetch your record type IDs. So what have we looked into so far? We have looked into how to get the key prefixes of an S object, how can we fetch a record type name or all the record types by name for an S object, and the third thing, how can we fetch a record type ID for a single record type in concern. Okay, for all of this you'll need the S object, which is your contact or account in this case. Right, now let's look at the third use case, which is to identify or fetch pick list values. Now let's take in the object name, will take in opportunity this time, and now we need a field name which is a pick list field, right? So we can use the stage name. All right, this is a field in opportunity which has some pick list values. Now for pick lists you have schema dot pick list entry as a class available. All right, now if you want to fetch a list of pick list values, let's create a schema dot pick list entry array and call it PLE, and let's use the schema method. We'll say schema dot get global describe dot get object name, just like the first one. We'll say get object name dot get describe, and now instead of the get key prefix we can use dot fields. Now this returns a map of fields, and then we can say get map, and then if we want to choose a specific field, we can say dot get field name. In our case it is the stage name, and then we can say get describe. All right, now get describe will give you the entire metadata information about that particular field for the particular object right here. And now to get the pick list values, we can use the method get pick list values. All right, this looks a bit tedious and it looks a bit long and complex, but it is not. So if you break it down part by part, first of all you are looking into the schema, you're describing a schema, you're looking into a particular object or S object, you're describing the object, you're going down further to the object and describing your fields, you're setting up a map for from the map you're trying to get a particular field and you're describing that field, and from that field you're trying to fetch the pick list values. All right, so this is the breakup. Now let's add a system.debug and let's try to debug this. And since this is an array of schema.picklist entries, now schema.picklist entry also has certain methods like get label and get value. So if we simply iterate here and say for each schema.picklist entry in this particular list, we can fetch information. We can say picklist in PLE, I can say system.debug picklist.getLabel. This would be one method, and the other method would be picklist.getValue. So this is nothing but your label and API names. All right, let's try to save this now. So it saves up fine. Let me add some cosmetic changes. I'll just add a hyphen in between so that we can identify this properly. And now let's execute our code from anonymous, and let's take the third use case now, which is schema use case to identify picklist values, and let's see what results come up. Execute. So it executes fine, and let's click on the debug only. So you see I'm getting a list of debug statements since we iterated it in the for loop. The first one is prospecting, then qualification, then needs analysis, and so on and so forth. If I quickly have to go to my org and go to opportunities and check the stage names there, let's open any random opportunity. And you see these are all your stage names. So you see prospecting, qualification, needs analysis, closed won and closed lost, all of it is coming in our debug log, which means the third prospectus of using schema class has also worked successfully. So these are some of the examples wherein we can use schema, and I'll also add this description, this link for this Apex reference guide for schema class, which you can refer. All right, let's look at the next question. Question number 30. How do you use invokable Apex methods from process builders? All right, so the 30th question asks us, how do we use invocable methods through process builders, right? So we've heard that we can call process builders, call Apex from process builders. Today let's look at how we can do it actually. I'll simply go to process builders here and we'll create a new process builder. All right, so let's create a contact process if we haven't already. All right, let's create a new contact process. Okay, and our use cases, we will be just doing a small debug and just checking if the invocable method is executed or not. Let's just try to attempt that first of all. So I'll just call it contact processes, and I'll just say whenever the record changes, I want to start this process. I'll just click on save. So I want this process to be executed every time a contact record is created. So let's just say only when a record is created, and what is the object in concern? It is the contact object. All right, so whenever a record is created, I'll click on save and I'll evaluate it always. So I'll just say no criteria, just evaluate the actions. So I'll just say evaluate always. All right, I'll click on save. Now here in the immediate actions, let's click on add action and let's see the action types. So you see here there are different options, and the first option says that you can call Apex method, right? So if I click on Apex here, you get to write an action name, call Apex method, and here you get the list of Apex classes which are available for you. But when I click here, I do not see any class, right? Which means, and the help text says the Apex class must have an invocable method. Now what does that mean? This means that I'll have to create a method which will be an invocable method. All right, so let me just quickly go to some existing Apex class. Let's go to the navigate to URL controller, And let's do something. Let's create an invocable method. All right, I'll just create a new method. I'll just create a new one. I'll call it public static void fetch see what came from process builders. All right, and your invocable methods only take list of IDs, right? So I'll just take the record IDs that come in picture. For our case, it would be the contact ID. All right, and to make this an invocable method, I have to write an annotation that says invocable method. All right, this is the annotation that makes the method invocable, and it can be invoked from the process builder. Now that we have saved it, I'll just add a debug log here, system.debug. I reached here with, I'll just say record IDs. Let's just see what record IDs hold. All right, I have the method set. Now if I go back to my process builder, I won't be seeing it here because I'll have to refresh this page, I think. So if I go to Apex, let me see if I can find it here now. So it's not coming up. I'll have to refresh this. All right, so let's go to the contact processes and let's edit it. All right, so my changes are still here. I'll just go to Apex now, and now if I go to the find Apex method and type navigate, so I'm seeing my controller because I have an invocable method there, right? Let's select this one and I'll just say call Apex method. All right, and then here it's saying set the Apex variables. So when I click on add row, I can set some values. So you see there's this parameter coming up. What is this parameter? This is the parameter that I set on my method, record IDs, this right here, right? I'll just say record IDs, and see this can be an ID, it can be a field reference, or it can be a formula or a global constant. So here I'll just take the field reference and I'll point it to the ID of the record that has come in. Okay, so if I just type record ID, I think I should have it. Should not be the master ID. Let's just search by ID, contact ID, right? So let's take the API name ID, this right here, choose, and I'll just click on save. All right, so my process builder is created. Let's just activate this. I'll just click on confirm. So now that our process builder is activated, let's do something. Let's do some actions on the Apex method, right? So when we get the IDs here, what we want to do is we'll just try to fetch the contact record, or else let's try to get the first record from this list. Con record, we'll say select ID comma last name from contact where ID in record IDs 0th element, right? This would give me the first record. Now what do we want to do? We just want to update the last name. Just to see our Apex code in action, we'll just try to say con.last name is equal to trainer new. All right, then we'll just try to say update con record. Let's save it. All right, now let's try to create a new contact record here. Let's click on new, and I'll just enter Mr. T new and try to save it. So the record got saved, but you see that the name has the last name has come up as Mr. Trainer new, exactly, basically trainer new, right? Exactly that we set here in the method trainer new. And also if I just check the debug log, maybe I'll get my debug logs available here, the one that I mentioned here at line number 8. Let's try to find that out as well. So if I open this log, which is the largest in size, let's just click on debug only, and yeah, we are seeing that I reached here with ID, the contact ID that we are currently looking at, right? This is how you would probably call a invocable method from a process builder. Prerequisite would be you should have a method and that should be annotated with invocable, right? Let's do one more thing. This is a negative test case scenario. If I just create one more invocable method in the same class, and let's see what happens. So let's say there's another process builder which wants to access some other method. If I just create this method and say see what came from pb2 and click on save, let's see what happens. So you see I get an error which says that you can only have one method per type. So a single Apex class can only hold one invocable methods. All right, cool.